No matter how long it
In 1944, the United States was 3 years into World War II. Like most areas of the country at this time, all resources in York County, Pennsylvania were directed towards the war effort. With an Air Force base located across the Susquehanna River and an Army base and airport located at the northern end of York County, the citizens of this area would get a glimpse of the new war machines flying overhead daily. But 1944 was different for York Countyans, as these war machines would start falling from the sky. Join me as I attempt to locate and explore the locations of these crash sites in 1944 and interview local citizens who witnessed these events 79 years ago.
And the plane crashed. We ran back there to where it was.
to overcome this premeditated invasion.
The first crash in 1944 was a P-38 fighter plane on April 3rd. The pilot was 24-year-old Evelyn Sharp of the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron. Evelyn's plane went down just across the border in Cumberland County after taking off from the New Cumberland Airport in York County.
So there's actually a memorial here for Evelyn at this preserve of some sort that I didn't even know existed. But somewhere on these grounds is the actual crash site of her P-38 in 1944. It looks like there's a series of trails here. I gotta try to find something that matches up to what I saw in the newspaper article. It was some type of field at the top of this hill. And you can see 83 North down below me here. So many times I drove that route and had no idea that this place or even this crash site existed. So that's pretty cool. Most of the letters are missing on this thing, but you can see it used to say crash site pointing that way. So we'll follow this trail here back down over the hill here and see what's going on. Looks like this thing crosses this creek here and goes straight up again. So hopefully this leads to some type of plateau that matches the photos of Evelyn's plane crash site. There it is. This highway would not have been there in 1944. So this would have been a straight field into that slight hill on the other side, which does match up with the photos of this crash scene at that time. So on December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air.
And we were brought into the war. There was a call for women to sign up to what was referred to as the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron. So Evelyn actually signed up for that. She had already been flying for many years. I mean, she started flying when she was 15 years old.
Evelyn's hometown of Ord, Nebraska held fundraisers to fund her training. Multiple businessmen got together to purchase her first plane. At age 18, she was the youngest woman to hold a commercial pilot's license. At age 20, she became the youngest woman to receive a flight instructor's license and began training pilots in Mitchell, South Dakota.
And on February 15th, 1943, she was transferred to Long Beach in California. This was the base for a lot of the operations and the big bombers that were being made out there. She was the first person to fly an A-20 from one side of the coast to the other. In fact, she flew 12 of those planes. Evelyn was flying this newly manufactured P-38 from the manufacturing plant in California to Newark, New Jersey to be sent overseas for the war effort. She did note that there were some issues with the plane in her logs. On April 3rd, 1944, Evelyn took off from New Cumberland Airport to continue her route into New Jersey. She would most likely notice right away that there was something wrong with the engine. It was determined that one of her engines gave out. It's nothing but hills in this area, so she would have been looking for a flat place to put it down, and this was an open field at that point. They described the crash as a pancake-type landing where she just would have hit straight down on the ground because the plane was barely damaged. Unfortunately, the nose gear is directly under the cockpit of that P-38, and that actually shot up to the plane, ejecting her from the plane, which is what ultimately killed her.
Evelyn was adopted. Shortly before her death, she learned that the woman she knew as Aunt Elsie was actually her biological mother. She was not classified as a veteran, so her family received no benefits. Her friends put money together and sent it to her family for burial costs. The second military plane crash in 1944 was on June 7th. A B-24 bomber crashed on the Bayshore farm between Newberry and Yoakumtown. It was on a test flight from Olmsted Field across the river. 5 were killed and 1 civilian used a parachute to escape. He was the only one to survive.
So I wanted to check with local citizens of the area where the B-24 crash occurred. So I started with preserving the History of Newberrytown Facebook page. Dominique Miller of Hometown History runs that group. And definitely check out the Hometown History page. It's great local history for York County. But after posting these pictures and questions about where the Bayshore farm might be, I got several people commenting with all kinds of information. So I observed a post by Charles Yost, who said he spoke to an eyewitness of the falling aircraft and said that this guy and his sister were actually working the farm when that plane went down, and he witnessed the whole thing. So I then reached out to Charles to see if I could make contact with this witness so he could tell me what he saw 79 years ago.
You can see where this plane crashed.
Really?
If you as you came towards me, you came across the Little Iron Bridge.
Yeah. Well,
and then you made a right-hand turn.
Yes, yep.
And then right up in the field there, not too many hundreds of feet, is where the big, as I remember, the big landing gear landed. And then up the hill is where the whole plane disintegrated. At that time, my grandfather stood in the market, and he used to raise produce, red beets, onions, raspberries, and so forth. And he owned this plot of ground right next to me over here. And we were out in that field in the who knows, pulling weeds.
Yeah.
And we saw the plane on fire.
Wow.
My sister-in-law, and she's my sister, and she's dead. But we saw the plane like it went way over there, and it circled way around, like as I refer to, over Huntsberger's farm, and made an approach into there. So we saw the whole thing come right down.
Wow. So what do you remember exactly?
I remember from watching the plane on fire the whole way.
So it actually was on fire while I was in the
One engine was on fire, yes. It was smoking.
Wow.
I do, yeah, no doubt to that. And then when it came down, my sister and I were here in the field, so we just went back through the field, and we were one of the very few first there. Of course, newspaper people did not interview kids.
Right.
I forget what year that was.
44.
44.
Yeah.
So I'd have been 12 years old.
Right.
And my sister would have been 13.
So you were in where the water tower used to be, in that area? Where exactly was the field you were working at?
Got to go past my trees. I was in the area there of where the brush is.
Okay.
I was to the right of the post, and in that way, there's a little hump there, and the plane crashed right back here, and where it first hit was a ridge of rocks.
So you're saying you were standing right over there?
Over there in the to the left, I'd say to the left of the trees, but out that way a little farther.
So you saw this thing circling around above us?
From over here. It circled there, went way over around, and then made the approach and came in back there. I don't know if it's another 1,000 feet past my fence.
So then what happened after it went down? What did you do?
all my sister and I did, we ran back there to where it was until we were up as close as we wanted to be because there was still fire and smoke.
Yeah.
And we just stopped there and watched those things, and then we turned around and came home. It was a 4-engine B-24, yes.
So did you see any of those flying around before up here? I mean, during that time,
Oh,
obviously.
we saw all kind of planes flying around because Middletown was a repair place.
Yeah.
Olmsted was a repair for aircraft.
Yeah.
So there were all kind of planes flying different times.
You got to see pretty much everything then, right? I mean, all the warplanes that were flying around at that point.
If any of that came in there for repair.
Right, that's fascinating. Wow. So did you see the guy jump out? So there's a guy that parachuted.
Yes, we saw the guy bail out
Really?
over there because the wind carried him.
So you saw him come out. You're staring up at this thing, right? And you just see some guy come out of the plane.
Yeah.
What are you thinking at that point? You thinking this thing's going to be a crash? Or?
You wonder whether there's any more coming out.
Yeah, right. Right.
That's what you would wonder.
Yeah.
But nobody ever.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Did.
Yeah. So you saw him bail out and you saw the wind take him.
Well, yeah, it wouldn't take much of a breeze to bring him, over into this area.
Yeah.
He didn't float as far as the plane went.
So how far down did you go then to look at the crash?
We just went to where we could see the ground being damaged.
Oh, okay.
And we did not go down around, but we took notice of the large landing gear that landed almost down at the creek.
Is that right?
And not too far in from the bend of the what's now Eden Road.
Yeah.
Right before it went across
Really?
that
So it was
bridge.
all the way down there. There was landing gear down there.
That's where what they hit this stone ridge, and there was no give.
Okay. Yeah, look, all the pile of rocks down there, I didn't realize there's that much rocks here.
I don't know how I accumulated those. I'd like to get rid of them.
There was no debris from the plane up here. It was all down off the side of the hill down there.
It was all in a restricted area.
Yeah.
From where it hit the rock ridge on down towards the creek.
Wow, that is fascinating. I mean, you remember anybody else that witnessed it around that time, or?
There's names in
In that information?
in that paper here.
Okay.
But I'm sure there's none of them probably living anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Man, Mr. Ream, I can't believe you saw this thing.
We saw it, my sister and I, yes.
And he ended up buying the property. So where was your grandfather's farm at? Where was if that was his field, where was his farmhouse at?
He's the one that had the butcher shop.
Oh, okay.
At
So
Yoakumtown.
So he just owned the land. He didn't really have a farmhouse or anything.
No,
here.
he didn't. You can see the little shed there.
Oh, yeah,
The house right there in the corner is where we lived.
Oh, okay.
From 35 until 47.
Oh, wow. So you were living right there and just come back here and work the farm?
Yeah,
field?
so we just walked up here. And
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. Hard to see after coming in from the sun.
Yeah.
That
wow,
was
look at that.
that was the first station. Do you want any more light in here?
No, it's fine. Thank you. Wow, look at that. So which one was this? Was this the vape shop?
Beg your pardon?
Was that where the vape shop's at there?
This is where the
Okay.
the vape, and if you can see that's the Robin Hood restaurant right there.
Oh yeah.
At the back corner.
Look at that. So who are these people?
Okay, this is my wife and I.
Oh really?
That's the first car I owned, 1946 Ford convertible.
Oh, that's great. What is that house up there?
That house was part of Valley Green Golf Course. That was my grandparents' house.
Oh, so it's no longer there.
None of it's there.
Oh. Is that same?
I'm getting a reflection here. This is the intersection out here at Yoakumtown.
Oh yeah.
And there's the barn that went with this house.
Oh, jeez, that's crazy. Look at that.
And these are and that's the picture of the station. It was just a 2-bay service station, did state inspection.
Oh, so this is where the parachute guy landed.
The guy that bailed out landed right between the barn and the road, as I remember, because right over here is where it hit down and ended up down through there.
And where'd you say the landing gear ended up?
Clear down the creek. That was the biggest piece that was left, I think. And I really think that got torn off by that rock ridge. It came back through from the road out here. The ridge, it goes straight back through my place, and there's that little road, and right across in here is where the plane landed.
Oh, so that is the Bayshore Farm. That's what we were trying to figure out, where this was.
Yeah, we call him Walty, but it was Walter Bayshore.
So is this Hemlock?
That would be Hemlock.
So the plane didn't cross Hemlock, right?
No, no. There was a bank right here, probably 6-8 feet high, but he cleared the bank.
Okay, but the parachute guy did land.
Parachute guy landed, we were told, in the barnyard.
Oh, okay.
I think that's where somebody recovered the parachute.
Jeez, so is this the Bayshore Farm too?
No, that's I don't know who that might have belonged to. I don't think it was. I thought the Bayshore Farm was back this way.
Yeah.
Because Yoakumtown Road would be right over here.
Yeah, I gotta look for this. I never even noticed this driveway there, because I guess there's two developments back there now, right? Or?
Yeah, there's possibly new houses here. The wheels would have landed right down in this area. I'd say the planes hit up here first.
Yeah.
But maybe my angle's off.
I returned home and began reviewing the documents that Mr. Ream gave me. He was given the military crash investigation report, which includes statements from several witnesses and the survivor, Norman Shuey. Shuey's statement was written as follows. I, Norman Fisher Shuey Jr., on 7 June 1944 at approximately 09:15 a.m., in the company of Lieutenant Shelley, Lieutenant George Gibson, Wilfred Rainsford, Adam Dietz, and Earl Smythe. My job was to parallel the generators in flight and was stationed in the navigator's compartment behind the pilot seat at approximately 2,000 feet altitude and 100 miles minimum speed. Looking out the window, I spotted number 2 engine afire. It was a red flame at first and was completely around the engine. It later turned bluish white. I immediately notified Rainsford, who is crew chief. He was standing behind the pilot and co-pilot. He then notified the pilot, Shelley. Shelley looked out and saw the condition. My view was obstructed and therefore I could not see the action taken by the pilot. I could hear the engine. Smythe told us 2 was on fire and then he went back. Rainsford and I put our chutes on at that point. Gibson started to put his on and then told Rainsford and I to open the bomb bay doors. Shelley, meanwhile, continued to pilot the ship. Gibson gave the order for Rainsford and I to bail out. He told us a number of times, but we hesitated because the pilot was still at the controls and the ship was in normal line of flight. Smythe and Dietz in the rear had no way of getting the order to bail out. Gibson, standing in the navigator's compartment, gave the order to shut off the gas on number 3 engine. He appeared to be very excited and repeated himself a number of times. Rainsford got there first and shut it off himself. Rainsford and I, to accomplish this, had to be in the bomb bay. Then I assisted Rainsford to adjust his chute. Then Shelley stood up. I couldn't see whether he still had controls in his hand or not. The plane appeared to be in level flight at the time. Shelley gave the word to bail out. He said, "Go ahead and jump. You only have 1,500 feet. Pull it quick." Before I left the ship, I noticed that the landing rear warning horn had been blaring for a number of minutes. At that point, I jumped out the bomb bay door head first. I believe the plane crashed about the same time that I landed. The plane was not in view from the spot where I landed about a block away. I got it from the ground and headed towards the ship, which was smoking. I yelled for help from the farmhouse and ran towards the spot. I found 2 men burning near the wreckage. I pulled them clear of the flames, but they were dead. There were several explosions even after the ship had burned. To my knowledge, the number 2 engine did not explode at any time when in the air. The ship was completely destroyed by the time I reached it. I stood around for some time and then the officers came and I was taken to the base hospital and released. Norman F. Shuey, Jr. Why didn't Carlisle native Wilfred Rainsford jump? The first person to make contact with Norman Shuey when he touched ground at the Bayshore farm was Seti Bayshore. In her statement, she stated, "When I first saw the airplane, it was heading east. There was smoke coming out of the plane and I could see fire. They went to go around a second time and it was getting lower. I then saw a man jump with a parachute and another object fall which looked like a man. I was the first one to talk to the man who jumped as he landed near the barn. He hollered help. We then went over to the scene of the crash as the plane had come down in a glide. Did Seti see Rainsford jump and not open his chute? The investigation concluded that the cause of the crash could have been due to Lieutenant Gibson accidentally ordering engine number 3 to be cut off. But another conclusion suggested that the loss of control could have been caused by wing structure failure due to the fire. I then searched for and located the son of Norman Shuey Jr., 79-year-old Norman Shuey III. I called him to see if he'd be willing to fill in the gaps in his father's incredible story.
Hello?
Mr. Shuey.
Yes.
So, I've been researching this entire incident. He was the lone survivor of this plane crash in 1944. I mean, it's a miraculous story when you really look at it. I've been talking about this for weeks now, and I started looking into him, and I think it was 07 where he unfortunately passed away. But I saw that, he had a son. And, so here we are. Can you tell me what you know about that? Because there's a couple mysteries surrounding this. And one is Mrs. Bayshore commented when she saw your father jump out of the plane, she saw another object come out of the plane that looked like a man. And I'm wondering if it's the guy that he helped put the parachute on.
My understanding of that part of the story is Lieutenant Shelley, who was the captain of the aircraft, he was going to make an effort to belly land the 24. That was his expectation. His co-pilot, who had been in Europe and had been brought back to the United States to fly test flights here, he was war-weary.
Okay.
And so the co-pilot, when they looked out and saw number 3 engine on fire, the Lieutenant Gibson sort of became unhinged.
Oh.
And it probably was not inappropriate given his military experience in Europe and the fact that he had come home war-weary. But when Lieutenant Gibson sort of became distraught, he jumped out of his seat to put his chute on, and then Dad said he sort of became disconnected from the whole thing and didn't return to his seat to take the controls of the aircraft so Lieutenant Shelley could put his chute on.
Wow.
So that obligated he was the captain of the aircraft, but he was a lieutenant. He was a first lieutenant. That obligated Shelley now to have to ditch the aircraft because he obviously couldn't jump out of it. So their destiny was then sort of locked in, and Lieutenant Shelley made the announcement over the PA system, "We're losing altitude rapidly. If you're going to jump, you got to jump now." So Dad and I'm not sure which other gentleman it was, and Dad worked with all 5 of these people sort of on an everyday basis.
Right.
And they looked at each other and they put their chutes on, and neither of them was jump trained, and they were both civilians. And they went back and they opened the bomb bay doors, and Dad and he looked out, and I recall my dad saying this, there's about an 8-inch catwalk goes down between the 2 bomb bay doors. And Dad and the other gentleman looked down, and because they weren't jump trained, Dad was afraid when he jumped out of the forward edge of the bomb bay that the slipstream would catch him and cut him in half on the back edge of the bomb bay door.
Yeah.
We know now that physics wouldn't have allowed that, but Dad didn't know this, and of course this is on an aircraft that's coming down. So this other fella and Dad, again, Captain Shelley come on and said, "If you're going to go, you got to go." They were like at 1,000 feet, and so Dad at that point, he jumped, he counted to 3, and he pulled the ripcord, and he said the crack of that chute opening going off in your ear. and the other fellow went out. And this is speculation on my part, but yes, Mrs. Bayshore was right. Another fella did jump.
Wow.
And sadly, and this is speculation on my part and also on Dad's, a B-24 obviously has twin vertical stabilizers. There was an indentation on one of the vertical stabilizers that wasn't consistent with the impact. And Dad's speculation was possibly the other civilian that jumped, rather than waiting to count to 3, he may have pulled his chute prematurely.
Oh.
The vertical stabilizer. And that may have been what killed him.
Oh, my God. So it might be true then.
The way I understand this particular B-24, it had come home from a rather illustrious series of bombing runs. Obviously, it had to be in Europe. And Dad wasn't even supposed to make this run. His boss was supposed to make it, but his boss was tied up with something. So he said, "Norm, out. Will you make this test flight with me?" So they all went up. Dad said everybody signs out a parachute when they go up.
Really?
And then when you come down, you sign it back in. Dad said all we ever used the parachutes for were seat cushions because the seats on the aircraft have a depression to accommodate. And my dad was short in stature anyway. So they just threw the parachute in the seat to fill up the cavity, and they used them as seat cushions.
Jeez.
So now they're all scrambling around to find a parachute because nobody ever seriously thought they'd ever be jumping one.
Right.
You know, I remember him distinctly saying, I'm standing at the leading edge and I'm thinking I'm going to get cut in half by the slipstream.
Yeah.
But at that point it was like, hell, just which way do you want to go?
Right. Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah.
And the next thing, the ground's coming up real fast on Bayshore's farm.
Yeah.
And Dad, with no jump training, he instinctively tried to land on his feet. And subsequently, and it took 15 years to get the corrective surgery, but he crushed 2 discs in his lower back.
Really?
From the impact. But he's a young man. He's only, he would have been 30, I guess. He peeled off the chute, and he saw the aircraft going in on a glide path. And it went up over the hill at Bayshores. If you stand in the farm where the barn was and look across the what was used to be a country road, there's a hill on the other side. Right, and Dad could see the aircraft gliding in over that hill. He was able to pull 1 or 2 of the burned bodies out, drag them out. And Captain Shelley sadly wound up in one of the engines. And the story is that so much of his body was in the engine assembly that they actually buried the engine with his remains at the end of the flight line at Olmsted.
Did he ever fly again?
Oh, yeah.
Did he really?
Well, I'll tell you how it went. Dad went back in the staff car, and he walked up to the chow hall and had lunch. Now imagine, this is a guy that just lost 5 of his close friends, drugged 2 or 3 charred bodies out of the aircraft. He works the rest of the day.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Oh, no. He works. He couldn't even get a ride to the chow hall. And this is a guy that's got 2 crushed discs in his back.
Oh, my God.
Walks up to the chow hall, has lunch, and because of the fuel rationing, he and his several of his brother-in-laws all lived up in Perdix, up above Marysville.
Oh, okay.
And they all ride together. So Dad rode home that day at close of business.
Oh my God, this story just gets more incredible the more that I hear it. I mean, he's basically
you haven't even heard. You believe me, you already. It's Barry, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
You haven't even gotten started. It gets worse or better.
Yeah.
Okay, as fascinating as it was to hear the son of the sole survivor from this crash tell his father's story, he put me in touch with his daughter, who actually had audio recordings of her grandfather telling the story himself.
June the 7th, 1944, at 9:30 in the morning. Beautiful sunny day, June the 7th, 1944. This was Lieutenant Shelley, and the co-pilot on this particular trip was a Lieutenant Gibson, and he had been back from overseas. He had been shot down several times, and this was like his R&R coming back to the States and working, being a pilot in flight test like in places like Middletown. And I saw that it did have an engine change. In fact, the number 2 engine was changed. That was a new engine, or a rebuilt engine. We considered it as a new engine. And I looked down and I saw this smoke and fire coming out around the cowling on this number 2 engine. So I said to Lieutenant Shelley, and of course we were off the ground. And we were maybe 40, 50 feet, not more maybe than 50 feet off the ground, or 100 at the most, and we were getting to the end of the runway by then. What he did was he started to make a left turn. He was going west at this point and made a left turn and started back, and they figured what he intended to do was to land, come back to Middletown, and come into Middletown. But the co-pilot would get his chute on in a case like this, and then take over the aircraft, fly in the aircraft, and the pilot would put his chute off. Well, to make a long story short, Lieutenant Gibson never got back in his seat again, and he said, "Go ahead," he said, "you only have 750 feet. So with nobody in a co-pilot seat and him looking like he might be going to get out, because I knew he wasn't going to get out because he didn't even have a chute on yet. Of course, he could have had it on automatic pilot. But I figured, and I said the bell was ringing to bail out. I figured, this is it. It's about time to go. And at only 750 feet, we never at that time ever had any instructions about jumping, using a parachute, what to do, or anything else. So I was standing at the right front side of the bomb bay, and I wondered, what's going to happen when I go out here? And of course, the chute's hanging on your seat. I went out just like you do a high dive. I didn't know any other way to. And I was still head first, but I pulled the whipcord, and of course, the chute opened, and I did cool the airplane, and man, it cracked. Oh man, it's just like a shotgun. And about that, and by then, I'm looking, and now I know the chute's open, and I'm looking down and have no idea where I'm going to land. And I'll tell you, you come down real fast. I saw I was over ground. In fact, as you know, and where the aircraft landed and where I landed was down in York County, in the Bayshores farm. And of course, you've been there, so you know all about that. So, but that's where, in fact, the airplane came in over Mr. Bayshores out in the field plowing, and we come in right over he had mules at that time, was plowing with mules. And we come in, in fact, he said the aircraft scared the mules because at that time we were pretty low because the aircraft landed on his farm. And as you know, his wife was the first one to come out to me and brought me something to eat. And I need something to eat like I need to go home ahead. But anyway, I landed on the Bayshore farm and so did the aircraft. And from where the aircraft landed and where I actually physically landed wasn't more than a half a city block at the very most. But I couldn't see where the aircraft went because I was down, the aircraft was in a field and I was down over along in there. Actually, I was in their pasture. Their pastures right near the barn. In fact, I was real close to the hog pen. And some of the guys used to kid me and say about I landed in the hog pen when I bailed out. That wasn't really close to the hog pen, but it wasn't too far away either. But and anyway, I remember when I landed, and I remember looking down, and I remember fellas saying about you could steer the chute by pulling on the shroud lines from one side to the other. So why I ever did this, I don't know, and I've been told since it's good I didn't pull them because if I'd have pulled them and spilled the air out, which is what you're really doing when you guide the chute, and I don't know what it was steering from because I didn't know where it was going to land. So it was just one of those crazy things you do. I pulled on one side, and of course nothing happened, and I pulled on the other side, and this was all just a matter of seconds. And of course I didn't spill any air out of the chute, so I didn't go any direction other than the direction that I was going. I had not pulled it at all. But anyway, I looked down, and I'll tell you, that last couple hundred feet come up awful fast. And of course, here again, I had no information about what to do, like they say, bend your knees, Anyway, I hit, and when I landed on my feet, the chute, it pulled me over, and I was on the flat of my back. And the first thing I did then was to see if I was still alive or not. You see if you can move, and of course I was. And I got up and took the chute off, took the harness off, and I went down through this little meadow here at his farm, and to one of his fences that was around it. And I even remember a thing like this. I always remembered hunting and that sort of thing. And and my father told me, and the mill in general, just in general, that go over a fence, get at a pole where the wire is secured to it, and you won't do much damage to the fence when you crawl over the fence. So I remember that. I left the chute lay, and I went over the fence and just across a dirt country road, narrow country road, and up a bank about, must have been 15, 20 feet high. And this is where I couldn't see the aircraft from where I was. And as soon as I got to the top of this bank...
Okay, before I move on to the next plane crash, I want to make sure we're clear on a couple locations.
Towards me, you came across the Low Iron Bridge.
Yeah.
And then you made a right-hand turn.
Yes, yep.
And then right up in the field there, not too many hundreds of feet, is where the big, as I remember, the big landing gear.
All right, so according to Mr. Ream, that's where he saw the B-24 landing gear end up at. On top there is the development where the plane would have actually hit, but the backyard of this house is where he would have seen that landing gear. So that would have been the slope at the B-24 came straight down, because right over here would have been the Bayshore farm. I mean, it's the same angle as the structure on the old maps of the Bayshore farm. But this is the view that the Bayshores would have seen when Shuey parachuted into the barn area here and then ran over to the area of the crash across the street here. The third crash in 1944 was on Christmas Day. A C-47 crashed into the mountains while attempting to land at Harrisburg Airport.
On Christmas Day, 1944, there was a C-47 en route from Jacksonville, Florida to Minneapolis trying to land in Harrisburg International. It ended up crashing on the side of Reeser Summit. Now, based off the descriptions, it appears that it might have been on the side of the mountain here. I have been told it was actually on the other side, down below here, but the description I could find in the papers indicates that it most likely was, it clipped the top of this hill here and ended up crashing down over the side. Looking at the old photos, it's kind of hard to make out exactly where the location was, but I believe it was on the side of that mountain. They call it Round Top Mountain in the paper. The only Round Top mountain I know is the ski resort not far from here, but it obviously wasn't that. But it also indicates that there was a citizen that lived here that saw the plane go over many times and saw it getting lower and lower, and then she finally heard it crash. And she came up here to try to check it out. And her description, it kind of sounds like it's most likely up here, possibly down a little further on the side of the hill, which is now a development. Originally, it was just 16 that were injured, but I found a newspaper article a couple of days later showing that one person actually passed away in the Harrisburg hospital.
The day prior to this crash started the American counterattack at the Battle of the Bulge. The day after the crash, the siege of Bastogne is broken by Patton's Third Army tanks, and with it the Ardennes offensive collapses into failure. Germany would surrender 5 months later. The last battle of the war would end a month after that. The war would end in September of that year.